The heavy door of the old tack shed was already barred when Elias Thorne stepped inside. For a hard second, it looked like he was the very reason it had been sealed. The air hung thick with the scent of dust and dried manure, barely stirred by the hot breeze. Sun slips found their way through gaps in the rough-hewn planks, carving thin gold lines across the packed dirt floor. In the far corner, on a heap of old burlap sacks, a young woman sat, her knees drawn tight to her chest. Her dress was torn, hanging loose from one shoulder, scarcely reaching her thighs. Her legs were bare, scarred with bruises in shades of yellow and dark purple that hadn't yet begun to fade. When Elias's shadow fell over her, she flinched, as if expecting the next blow to come from him. Elias stopped where he was. He removed his weathered Stetson slowly, holding it against his chest. He didn't speak right away, his eyes sweeping across the small enclosure instead. He saw the iron shackle bolted into the wall. He saw the rusted length of chain lying in the dust. He saw the heavy bar on the outside of the door and knew at once it had been fastened from beyond the shed. Then he saw her wrists. Red marks circled them, rubbed raw. The woman swallowed hard. Her lips trembled, but she forced the words out in a cracked whisper. "My father," 3 times a day. Her eyes shifted toward a support beam beside her. Elias followed her gaze. Carved into the beam were 3 shallow cuts, clean and even. Not wild scratches, not careless marks, but 3 straight lines. Morning, midday, night. She did not cry. That was what struck him most. There were no tears left in her eyes, only a quiet, resolute waiting. "He drinks," she said softly. "Ah." Then he locks the door. Elias felt something shift deep in his chest. It wasn't just anger. It was shame. He had known Jebediah Albright for years, a struggling freight hauler who spent too much time at the Copper Kettle Saloon in Copper Creek, a man who laughed loud when he wanted cards and blamed others when he lost. Jeb had once told Elias that his daughter, Cora, was sickly and hard to manage. Folks in town had whispered that Jeb owed money and that a piece of land, a mining claim in Cora's name, might help clear his debts. What Elias saw in that shed was not sickness. It was control. Cora Albright was 25, old enough to speak for herself. But in this Arizona territory, a father's words still carried heavy weight, and daughters were expected to obey without question. Cora watched Elias the way a trapped desert fox watches a man holding a snare, waiting to see which side he stood on. Outside, boots crunched on the sun-baked earth. Jebediah Albright was coming back from the well. Elias's mind worked fast. If he walked away now, Cora would count 3 more marks before the sun dipped below the canyon rim. If he stepped between father and daughter, he would step into trouble. The law in Copper Creek did not always favor daughters over fathers. Elias had once watched a drunk man break his own home apart. He had stayed quiet then. He had told himself it was not his business. He had hated himself for that silence ever since. He was not about to do it again. Jebediah stopped short when he saw Elias standing by the shed door. He set his water pail down slowly and wiped his mouth with the back of his hand. He smiled, but the smile did not touch his eyes. She gets dramatic in the heat," Jeb said lightly. "Girls get a wild streak." Elias did not answer at once. He stepped just enough to block Jeb's view into the shed. "She's locked in," Elias said calmly. Jeb shrugged, as if it meant nothing. "She runs off. I keep her close. That's called raising a child." Cora stayed still behind Elias. She did not speak. She did not defend herself. She only watched. Elias had come to buy a pair of pack mules. Instead, he had found this. "I'll take the mules," Elias said steady, "and I'll hire her for the drive back to my homestead. I need help. I'll pay fair." Jeb's smile faded. "She ain't for hire. She ain't livestock either," Elias replied. The words hung heavy between them. Jeb moved first. No warning, just a fist flying fast with the sour smell of stale whiskey on his breath. The punch glanced off Elias's shoulder. A second swing followed, wild and angry, but Elias caught him by the shirt and drove him back into the shed wall. The planks groaned. A distant horse nickered. Dust rose into the hot air. Jeb fought like a cornered animal. Elias fought steady. One hard hit to the ribs. One shove that sent Jeb stumbling into an empty feed barrel. Cora moved then. She grabbed a handful of dirt and threw it into her father's face. It was not brave in the way stories often tell. It was desperate, but it was enough. Elias reached for the key hanging on a nail by the door. He unlocked the shed and stepped between Jeb and the woman. "If I hear you lay a hand on her again," Elias said low and firm, "I'll come back with the law, and I won't come alone." Minutes later, Elias's wagon rolled away from the Albright place. Cora sat beside him, wrapped in an old wool blanket coat he kept behind the seat. She stared straight ahead and did not look back. Behind them, Jeb stood in the yard, his lip bleeding, his eyes cold and sharp. He was not thinking about fists anymore. He was thinking about the law. The wagon wheels ground over the dirt road as they left Copper Creek behind. The Salt River shimmered under the afternoon sun as they crossed at a shallow bend. Elias did not press Cora with questions. He handed her an enamel mug of water and let silence sit between them. "You're safe here," he told her when his homestead finally came into view. She nodded, but her eyes drifted toward the horizon as if she still expected someone to come riding after them. That first evening, when the sun began to sink and shadows stretched long across the yard, Cora stiffened. Elias noticed the way her shoulders tightened. He knew it was one of the hours she had carved into that beam. Morning, midday, night. Instead of speaking about it, Elias handed her a bucket and asked her to help feed the cattle. They moved from stall to stall together. The simple work filled the space. The moment passed without a barred door, without heavy boots stepping toward her. When the sky darkened and nothing happened, something small shifted inside her. Not trust, not yet, but maybe the start of it. The next morning, Elias rode into Copper Creek and stepped into the sheriff's office. Sheriff Ben Carter sat behind his desk with his boots resting on top, hat tipped back. He listened as Elias spoke. He did not interrupt. "Locked shed," Elias said. "Marks on her wrists. 3 times a day." Ben rubbed his jaw slowly. "Oh, you stepped into something," he said at last. "I know." Ben leaned forward. "Jeb filed a complaint this morning. Says you kidnapped his daughter." The word settled heavy in the room. "In this territory," Ben added carefully, "a father still carries weight." Elias understood what he meant. Blood often spoke louder than bruises. When Elias returned to the homestead that afternoon, Cora stood by the fence watching the road. She must have felt it before he saw it. Just before sunset, she spoke without turning around. "He won't stop," she whispered. Elias followed her gaze. Far down the road that led from Copper Creek, a thin line of dust was rising into the summer sky. The line of dust grew thicker as it moved closer, rising slow and steady against the pale Arizona sky. Cora did not run. She did not hide. She simply stood there with her hands resting on the fence rail, her face calm in a way that did not match the fear sitting deep in her eyes. Elias stepped forward until he stood slightly in front of her. He counted 3 riders. Jeb rode in front. 2 men followed behind him, both from town. The kind who spent more time leaning against saloon walls than mending fences. Their hats were pulled low, their faces hard. No badge in sight. The riders pulled up sharp in the yard. Dust rolled past them and settled around the porch steps. "You got something that belongs to me," Jeb called out. His voice was loud, but there was something tight under it, something that did not sound fully sure. "She ain't something," Elias answered, steady and calm. One of the men spat into the dirt. "This don't need to turn ugly," he said, though his hand rested close to his belt. Cora stepped out onto the porch behind Elias. She stayed close, but she did not hide behind him. That mattered. Jeb saw it. For a brief moment, his face changed. Not anger, not fear. Control slipping. "You think he'll keep you?" Jeb snapped at her. "You think this homesteader wants your trouble?" Cora did not answer. Her hands tightened into fists at her sides. Elias kept his eyes on Jeb. "You filed a complaint. Sheriff knows where she is. We can ride into Copper Creek and settle this the right way." Jeb gave a short laugh that held no humor. Settle it here," he said and swung down from his horse. It happened fast. Jeb shoved Elias hard in the chest. One of the other men tried to step around toward the porch. Elias moved before the man could reach the steps. He drove his shoulder into Jeb, knocking him back into the dirt. The two men circled, but neither drew a gun. This was not about bullets yet. It was about pride. Jeb swung wild. His fist caught Elias along the jaw. Elias staggered once, then steadied. He answered with one clean punch that split Jeb's lip. Blood ran down into the dust. Cora's voice cut through the air. Stop. It was not a scream. It was strong, clear. The second man froze when she grabbed a loose wagon spoke and stepped forward, her chin lifted. There was no chain on her wrist now, no bar door behind her. Jeb lay flat on his back, his chest rising fast. He stared up at the sky for a moment before speaking. You don't understand, he muttered. Elias stood over him. Then explain. Jeb pushed himself up slowly, wiping blood from his mouth. She signed it. The words made the yard go still. Signed what? Elias asked. Jeb's eyes flicked toward Cora just for a second. That was all it took. Cora swallowed. He made me sign something, she said quietly. Now the two hired men shifted where they stood. This was no longer about a runaway daughter. This was about paper, about land, and land in Arizona territory could turn neighbors into enemies faster than whiskey. Jeb climbed back into his saddle. We'll let the law sort it, he said, voice low and tight. You want law? You'll get it. The three riders turned and headed back toward Copper Creek, a dust rising behind them once more. Cora stood still until they disappeared from sight. Only then did her shoulders drop. What did he make you sign? Elias asked gently. She looked down at her hands. My grandmother's mining claim, the Willow Creek parcel. Elias felt a cold weight settle in his stomach. Land along Willow Creek was worth more than Jeb's mules, more than his shack. Ow, Elias asked. He said if I didn't sign, he'd lock me in there and never let me out, she said. 3 times a day until I did. Her voice did not shake. That scared Elias more than tears would have. The next morning, they rode into Copper Creek together. The town felt heavier than usual. People watched as they passed. News traveled fast in places like this, faster than horses. Inside the sheriff's office, Ben Carter stood by his desk. Jeb was already there, and his lip was swollen. His pride was not. Ben laid a folded paper on the desk between them. A transfer of land, Ben said. From Cora Albright to Jebediah Albright. He looked at Cora. Did you sign this? Yes, she answered. Did you sign it freely? The room went quiet. Even Jeb held his breath. Cora lifted her chin. No. One word, clear and steady. Jeb stepped forward. She's my daughter. It's family business. Ben's face hardened. A locked shed ain't family business. Jeb's jaw tightened. You gonna take a girl's word over her father's? Ben did not answer right away. He looked at the red marks still faintly visible around Cora's wrists. He looked at Elias, standing beside her, not speaking for her, only present. In this territory, Ben said slowly, a father has rights. But he don't have shackles. Jeb tried to argue. He spoke about discipline, about disavowal, about a girl who ran wild. Cora did not interrupt. She simply stood there. Ben finally nodded toward one of his deputies. Take him. Jeb's face turned pale for just a moment before anger covered it again. This ain't over, he said as they led him away. By sundown, the story had spread from the Copper Kettle Saloon to the church steps. Some folks said Elias had done right. Others muttered that a man had the right to raise his own child. But the paper was set aside for review, and Jebediah Albright sat behind bars for holding his daughter against her will. That night, back at the homestead, Cora stood near the fence again. The sky burned orange and red before fading into deep blue. It was always at sunset, she said softly. Now Elias knew what she meant. One of the 3 times. They waited together. The light faded. The wind moved through the tall grass. No one came. No boots crunched on gravel. No key turned in a lock. Cora let out a slow breath. For the first time since Elias had seen her in that shed, her eyes filled with tears. I thought no one would ever believe me, she said. Elias rested his forearms on the fence beside her. Sometimes, he said, it only takes one person to stand up. She looked at him then, not as a trapped animal watching a snare, but as someone starting to believe the snare had been cut. Still, deep inside, Elias knew this was not finished. Jeb was not the kind of man to let go easy, and Copper Creek had a way of changing its mind when money and land were involved. Out in the dark, far beyond the ranch lights, a single rider moved along the road, watching and waiting. The rider did not come through the front gate. He stopped far enough from the homestead house to stay hidden by the dark. Elias saw the shape of horse and man against the faint line of the horizon. He did not reach for his rifle. He simply watched. Cora stood beside him on the porch. She felt it too, that sense of being measured from a distance. "Is it him?" she asked quietly. "No," Elias said after a moment. "Jeb is still in his cell." The rider turned his horse slowly and disappeared back down the road. But the message had been sent. This was not over. 2 days later, word came from town. Jeb had posted bond. Money had changed hands, and men who owed him favors had spoken up. The land paper was being reviewed, but it was not yet void. There would be a hearing, and the judge riding circuit would decide. Cora listened without blinking. "He'll lie," she said. "Then you tell the truth," Elias answered. On the morning of the hearing, Copper Creek filled early. Wagons lined the street, horses tied to every post. The Copper Kettle Saloon was quieter than usual. Even the card tables felt the weight of it. Inside the small courthouse, the air was warm and still. Men removed their hats. Women whispered behind gloved hands. Jeb stood on one side of the room in a clean shirt and a stiff coat. The bruise on his lip had faded to yellow. He looked calm, almost confident. Cora stood on the other side with Elias beside her. She wore a simple blue dress Elias's neighbor had given her. The red marks on her wrists had faded, but they were not gone. The judge listened as Jeb spoke first. He talked about a stubborn daughter, about discipline, about land meant to stay in the family. He said she had signed freely, that she had been confused and influenced by an outsider. He did not once mention a shed. When it was Cora's turn, the room felt smaller. She stepped forward alone. "Did you sign this paper?" the judge asked. "Yes." "Were you forced?" Cora did not rush her answer. "He locked me in the shed," she said. 3 times a day, morning, midday, night. He kept a shackle on the wall. He said I would stay there until I signed." A murmur moved through the room. Jeb shifted where he stood. The judge leaned forward. "Why did you not speak sooner?" Cora's voice stayed steady. "Because I was afraid no one would believe me." Silence followed that, heavy and real. Then Elias stepped forward, not to speak over her, but to add what he had seen. He described the iron shackle in the wall, the chain in the dust, the 3 marks carved into the support beam. He did not raise his voice. He did not exaggerate. He simply told the truth. Sheriff Ben Carter confirmed the red marks on her wrists when he first saw her in town. He confirmed the locked shed. Jeb's confidence began to crack. "You got no proof I forced her," Jeb said sharply. "She's my daughter." The judge looked at Cora again. "Did you sign because you wanted to give him the land?" "No," she said. One word. "Strong." The judge sat back in his chair. "A signature given under threat is no signature at all," he said firmly. "The transfer is void." The room broke into low voices, some relieved, some angry. "And as for the confinement," the judge continued, "this court does not accept shackles as discipline." Jeb's face drained of color. He was fined heavily and ordered to stay away from Cora. The land remained in her name. For the first time, the law had not chosen blood over truth. Outside the courthouse, Cora stepped into the sunlight and stopped. She looked up at the wide Arizona sky. No shed roof above her, no planks blocking the light. "It's over," Elias said quietly. She shook her head once. "It's starting." Back at the homestead, the days moved slower and steadier. Cora worked beside Elias in the fields. She learned the rhythm of the land, planting, watering, mending fence. The first time sunset came without fear, she did not notice at first. She was laughing at something one of the ranch hands had said. Then she stopped and looked west. The sun dipped low. No bar door, no boots on gravel, no key turning. Tears filled her eyes, but this time they were not from pain. Weeks passed. One afternoon, a letter arrived from a lawyer in Phoenix. Jeb had sold what little he had left to pay debts and fines. He was leaving Arizona territory. Some said he was headed south. Others said west. No one cared much where. Cora stood by the fence again, the same place she had once watched for dust rising in fear. Now she watched cattle move slow across the field, and she felt the wind in her hair. I used to count the marks, she said softly to Elias. Every day I thought that was my life. Elias leaned against the post beside her. The scarred log section from the broken shed now stood near the watering trough, brought there as firewood, but never burned. The 3 carved lines were still visible. You don't have to count anymore, he said. Cora walked over to the post. She ran her fingers over the cuts. Then she picked up a hammer resting on a barrel nearby. Without hesitation, she struck the post once, twice, 3 times. The wood split down the middle. The marks were gone. That evening, as the sky turned gold and then deep blue, Cora sat on the porch steps. She did not stiffen. She did not brace for pain. She breathed. Elias sat a few feet away, giving her space but not leaving. You didn't have to help me, she said after a long silence. Yes, I did, he answered. She looked at him. Why? Elias thought about that summer afternoon in the shed, about the chain, about the way she had not cried. Because I stayed quiet once before, he said, and I won't do that again. The wind moved through the tall grass. Crickets began to sing. Cora smiled, small but real. 3 times a day, she said softly. That's how often he tried to break me. She looked out at the open land, but it only took once for someone to stand between us. The homestead lights glowed warm against the dark. No dust rose on the road. No rider watched from the shadows. The clock that had once ruled her life was gone. Not because time changed, but because fear